In this age of gender confusion, it's difficult to find advice you can trust to help protect your child from those who would seek to unduly influence them, setting them up to be manipulated and exploited. On Unmasking the Trans Movement, we discuss, educate, and deliver the info parents want and need to help their children, grandchildren, and even themselves.
Welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilder.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. With us tonight, Jon will be here, as well as Dr. Gillies, our co-host. They're going to take a look at Part 3 of the 9 key red flag clinical indicators of sex abuse being reframed by the trans pushers. That's all coming up right after this. Citizens and librarians alike have expectations for libraries, and well-run ones can be amazing for everyone. School libraries are often essential to educating children, and as such, special rules apply for the well-being of children in every corner of the world. The World Library Association aims to counter the woke American Library Association's efforts to indoctrinate and sexualize children and hide content from parents and grandparents. The World Library Association provides decades of experience with libraries, and we want to help educate and apply that experience to improve your libraries, whether you're citizens, teachers, librarians, and even trustees. Our common sense model policies comply with community standards, enabling libraries to become truly useful for everyone in the community, and empowering librarians to ensure they work in a safe work environment. The World Library Association. Have questions? We're always open to talk about your libraries, new projects, creative opportunities, and how we can help you. The World Library Association. See us online at worldlibraryassociation.org. Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with Jon Uhler. Well, Dr. Ann and Jon Uhler are standing by. They are all set to take another look, well, a third look, and it might be a fourth and a fifth and a sixth. You just never know. I could go in that direction only because there's just so much information when it comes to the 9 key red flag clinical indicators. And with each indicator, it gets more deviant along the way. There's things that go on with, obviously, the children who are involved, the parents, the just family members in general. There's so much to unpack that you can't do it all in one episode or even 2. 3 is going to be pushing it as well. We left off Part 1, I think, with a heck of a cliffhanger. We came back with Part 2 last week. Had a great show there. This is Part 3 tonight. And again, tonight we are looking to break down all of these 9 key red flags. And Jon is an expert at it, and Dr. Ann is an expert at it. So you're getting the good advice tonight. Let me tell you, stick around. Don't go nowhere. We've got about 3 or 4 people just getting onto the program. So we'll let them get settled. We'll let Dr. Ann and Jon kind of have a beginning introductory conversation here, maybe a review of what happened last week, and then we'll get into this week. If you have any questions or concerns about the show tonight, please put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Love to know what your name is, where you're from, and what your questions might be, and how we can possibly get to helping you, because we all know that you do need help. Jon, take it away.
Brad, thank you as always, and welcome back as always.
That's good to be here. As you can tell, I'm not at home, but hopefully people can hear me fine. I'm just on my cell phone, but yeah, I'm looking forward to reviewing what we've done, just kind of an overview again, so people kind of get, the first time if they're coming on, they are able to kind of track us a little bit and see where we're headed. But yeah, there's a lot of things regarding this whole area of indicators of sexual abuse, and we need to be able to identify those things and help parents be able to talk to their kids.
There we go. And to help parents understand, or people, all good people that hopefully are tuning into us either live and afterward. The reason why we're now camping on this issue is we tackle a lot of different issues when it comes to the trans movement, trans deception. But under the surface, or one of the most foundational of all issues, is the nature of the kids that are targeted by those that are wishing to exploit them either physically and or socially. And when I say physically, I mean medically. And so this needs to be understood because those that are trying to cover the real heinous nature of all of this, and really the trans movement simply boils down to this. They want to take a child, either a boy or a girl, and confuse them, then manipulate them, then exploit them, and get them on medications that are going to sterilize them, then eventually amputate sex organs. Welcome to the trans movement. So that's why it's so dangerous. So you and I are both therapists. We have years of experience working with troubled teens, including other populations. We're trauma therapists. So I thought it would be helpful. And you and I have been now working for 3 weeks. This will be our 4th episode, or part 3. I'm sorry, we actually had a preliminary, but part 3 of what are the red flags that are being ignored or actually downplayed or reframed by those that are looking to exploit our kids. So we're going to still stay very practical. And we started with the 9 red flag clinical indicators, but then I realized, you know what, we really need to camp on the behavioral indicators, because it's going to be the behavioral indicators that will catch or should catch somebody's attention, especially a mandated reporter, because they are mandated by law to understand where there's smoke, there's fire. So, and we were looking at the behavioral indicators. We will get back to that. I want to recommend 2 of your books. And you are a published author in 2 books that I would strongly recommend parents getting. This is your most, actually, second to the most. Let me get my fingers out of there. So Implosion, When the Pendulum Swings Too Far. So you can get these online or from us at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Or Anne, why don't you mention about your particular site?
Absolutely. So you can also go on to restoringthemosaic.ca, and you'll be able to access them there as well. So there's lots of avenues to get them. And yeah, Implosion is simply, it's a short read, really, an easy read. And it's just kind of laying it out there, what's going on, what is really going on in the culture right now. And that many parents are just so unaware of the issues really that their children are facing every single day. And it's not just in education and not just in school, but it's on social media and definitely their peers as well. So yeah, it's pretty tough out there for our children. I think it's probably the most difficult situations that any generation has ever faced. I really believe that. Every generation has its obstacles, right? And as you go through childhood and adolescence, and particularly puberty, those times of life. But this generation, these young children, like you said, Brad, or John, sorry, Brad said it too. These children are being exploited, purposely exploited in every realm of our culture, and it's so horrific. So
Right.
Parents need to be aware.
The other book, again, you can get it on Restoring the Mosaic, restoringthemosaic.ca, that's Canada.ca, or unmaskingthetransmovement.com, is The Ultimate Deception, The Truth of Gender Affirming Care. So beautiful color copy as far as the cover there, and excellent. Talk about a metaphor as well as the medical symbol of the snake. And so snakes are after our kids. That's what we're all about. And you, I, and Brad, this is a labor of love. We're donating our time. Your husband is donating you, so to speak. You guys are on vacation right now, so we'll jump into this because we only have an hour. You are gracious, and people really need to understand that this is a wonderful opportunity for them to hear from therapists that have worked with damaged kids. So we'll review real fast. How's that? I want to start with, and I don't know if you have seen this, so this will be good for all of our viewers to see. Okay, so why should we take this seriously? And we addressed a little bit this a little bit last time. So I introduced, or I made my own comment. Sorry about moving the screen. I'm trying to get my camera's in the way. My comment is this: the 13 members of the particular DSM task force, including Ken Zucker and Ray Blanchard, who made all billing possible for the trans medical and psychological treatments and services, thus creating a monetary incentive, opened the door to this. Time for them to repent and call for a retraction. We talked about that last time. I reemphasize this. Here is from, I would imagine, Reddit. It says this: I can't live like this anymore. I don't want my mom to suffer even more. I'm a 17-year-old girl with a flat chest, a deep voice, a visible Adam's apple, and some facial hair. There's no reason for me to continue to live. And by the way, Canada has passed the Medical Assistance with Dying Act. Okay, our supposition is they were anticipating this population coming down the pike to help defray medical costs. Okay, I destroyed my life, and I feel like all hope I have is stupid for me to have. I don't think any person will ever want to date me. Before all this, people were into me, but I destroyed that. No one is ever going to like me. There's nothing I can really do without getting reminded of my past and how much I miss it. I feel ashamed of what I did. I'm scared people will never let me do decisions on my own anymore. I was just a kid and I would have needed someone to help me accept myself, but a therapist didn't question my transness. I can't stop thinking about the life I could have had. I also think other people will now believe that they are something better than me. I love my mom. She is an amazing mom. She stopped me the first time from transitioning, but the second time she was also brainwashed and sadly thought that when all these professionals say it's the right thing to do to let your kid transition, that it must be the right thing. She thinks it's all her fault, but it isn't. I want to kill myself, but then she will feel even more miserable. How can I kill myself and let her know that I want her to be happy? I'm 17. Why do I have to think about ending my life? It's too much for me to handle. There's no joy in my life anymore. And your thoughts as you read that?
Oh my goodness, Jon, my heart just goes out to this young woman. I just want to weep, actually, and also I'm angry
There we go.
at the professionals because they have set her up, and so here we have, all these claims of transgender suicide. Is because the line that doctors were using for parents to bully them into transitioning their child was, do you want a dead daughter or a live son? Like, if you don't do this, they're going to kill themselves. But here, and we knew this to be true, Jon, and now we're hearing it firsthand that the suicidal ideation is coming after the transitioning and the realization of this young woman, like her life. She had a life, and then she talks about destroying her life, how she has what she's done to herself under the um, recommendations of professionals. This is where we need to see these young people get together. We need class action lawsuits against these professionals, and they need to be stopped because we're so tired of seeing these lives destroyed. This is horrible. And I guess, I would say to this young person that, there is hope. There is hope. And you can talk to people that are willing to speak truth. And sometimes, I would suggest too, go to a church, a pastor that's willing to speak truth, because they need not just the hope that they can be someone again, but there's an inner angst there that needs to be resolved, and there's a spiritual dynamic, I believe. And so we really want to be able to see these young people put on a path where they're going to get healing and help and hope for the future, because they do have a future.
There you go. And that young person is going to have to go through the grief and loss process, get in touch with their anger. They're so complicated. Our position is ultimately that these kids were exploited. The perps and the perp apologists and the pushers of this diabolical scheme will flip it. If some kid finally begins to open their eyes, right? At first, they're pushed into this, encouraged into this, every which way you want to, say it or can imagine. But the moment they begin to have reservations, and especially if they've gone through all the way to surgery, inevitably what they're going to hear is, well, you did it to yourself. Nobody forced you. So that's the classic cult and predator approach to once a victim awakens, especially from a brainwashed state, then they double down. These users, these manipulators and exploiters they take a very predictable approach at ensuring that ultimately these kids shut their mouths. And so my recommendation, and I would imagine yours as well, is that after and as they go through the healing process, use that anger, that righteous indignation to help warn others, sound the alarm so that you can stand in the gap for those that are also being manipulated and sucked into this by the manipulators and sociopaths and cult leaders and all that. And your thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking as you're talking about that, we're talking about professionals, doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists, but we have to remember, Jon, that many of these young people were ushered into this whole ideology in their public education, through their teachers, through coaches, very much like the sexual abuse, and they go hand in hand, because this is abusive and it's sexual, and it may not look like what we would call traditional sexual abuse. On the other hand, the vast majority of these children have been sexually abused. And I don't have stats on that, but we also know that they have several pre-existing mental health conditions. So these are very vulnerable children to start with. And so there is no conscionable excuse for education professionals, whomever, to be funneling these children into such a movement.
That's right. And again, to give parents and others watching a sense that this would not have been possible except for that blue book there, the DSM-5. 13 members of that task force allowed all this to be profitable. All of what? We've got ultimately double mastectomies, and there's Jazz Jennings. So the media has used all these different influences, right, to set kids up for a lifetime now of pain. So people really need to have a sense of assurance. Again, here's some additional graphs to show you this thing did not exist prior to 2005. Look at these graphs. Wherever you go around the Western world, you'll see this. So Anne, any additional thoughts before we'll do a quick review of the behavioral indicators. We're going to start with the clinical. What that means is under the surface. I figured, you know what, let's start looking at the behavioral indicators, and then we'll look at the clinical indicators, and we'll just review them very quickly because we left off on number 11, quite frankly, I believe. So
out of nine, Jon.
Out of nine,
There's something wrong with your math here, Jon.
Yes, it keeps expanding. Well, I haven't gotten to the clinical indicators, but there's also 11. So here we go. And I just want to reemphasize to people that if you have any mental health person worth their salt, let alone a mandated reporter, because again, we're thinking about how do you identify? Look at this picture of this girl. She was reviewed seen by, assessed by the medical doctor, Dr. Gallagher, quite frankly. This is from Dr. Gallagher's own site on Facebook. That's where we got this picture from. Okay, in the public domain, it's tragic. Look at all this. I'm going to increase this. Let me bring this over here. Better. Right, there's a picture. Okay, look at all the indicators of self-harm. How did this doctor, which scars were there first? Obviously, all the other scars. So this doctor purposely ignored all the self-injury. Oh, sorry. Oh gosh. Okay, I'm just going to try to. There we go. Okay, look at all those self-injury scars. Okay, if people don't like it, then part of me wants to say, too bad. Then we need to get energized. That
Yes.
this girl could have been the one who wrote that Reddit post. And so we need to be able to see that these kids are being exploited. So okay.
Well, and
Yeah.
even before they go through the double mastectomy, horrendous as it is, um, they've already been prescribed puberty blockers and have been on those for several years, which,
Being
I
sterilized.
mean, well, absolutely, and mood enhancing, like they change the individual's mood and
Okay.
actually exacerbate the distress. They don't cure it. It's not like it's helping the child, it's actually making it worse. And
So,
so the research that has been out in the media, in the public square, there's a lot of biased research out that has been promoting this stuff. And what's happening now, John, is that we're seeing verifiable research come out that is actually showing the true statistics and what has happened to these children, and that puberty blockers are actually making these children worse. Their dysphoria is worsening instead of getting better because it doesn't help them, because they already have all these pre-existing mental health issues that aren't being treated. They're not being treated for what has happened in the past, sexual abuse perhaps, or physical abuse, or bullying, and they're not being treated for those things. They're just being put on puberty blockers, and so we can medicalize these children and then ruin their lives.
there we go. I'd recommend people go back and watch the previous episodes. And so here we go. We'll just play catch up here. So we looked at what are the red flag indicate behaviorally. And again, not any one of these, 100% indicate their sexual abuse. But the more of these that you see, the more likelihood, the greater the likelihood is that something significant has happened. So look for a child that says they don't want to be that same gender. Okay, we could have social transition, we could have other things, but again, suddenly they're not comfortable in their own body, but more than just regular adolescence. They really don't, so much so that a girl's going to chop her, either gender is going to, or sex is going to chop off their sex organs. That's pretty radical. The second, we looked at self-injury. Third, we
Yes.
looked at changes as far as school performance and attitude. Number 4, concerning overall changes, physical, academic, emotional, and social. Drug and alcohol use. Again, when you see more and more of these together, you're dealing with a very troubled child. And this is where we left off last time. The oppositional, defiant, and antisocial activities. The more you see of these are representative, these pictures. I just put that one as far as the gun shooting. If you have a child watching, immersing themselves in violent video games,
Yes.
shooter games, how many of these school shooters inevitably are accessing these kind of games? The girl that's being abducted right there, that is to represent deviant kinds of deviant sexuality. So if you start to see, including what used to be called detective magazines, but those that have a darker theme where somebody's being overpowered, that's a red flag. And then fire setting,
That's right.
wetting oneself, soiling oneself, those are behavioral indicators as well. When you have a kid that's getting in trouble with the law, you see these significant and almost immediate. Well, the shorter the time frame, you can be guaranteed something else is going on. It could be as simple as peer group. It could be as simple as they're now on drugs, right? As we just saw. And speak to, again, some of this defiant and antisocial stuff that we see
Well,
with the teenagers that get sucked into the trans movement stuff.
well, and that's right. So when you have, so these are red flag indicators of sexual abuse, but and it's such a crossover
That's
that
right.
you see
That's
with
right.
the trans movement. But one of the things I was thinking here, John, when you're talking about violent video games, let's talk about violent porn, because these children, and I don't mean let's talk about,
No.
all the ins and outs of it, but porn has become, I mean, it never was a good thing, but now with, this live action, violent pornography, and
It's
that
called
to me,
gonzo. It's called gonzo porn. I had never heard of it till Alex
I
Aaron
hadn't heard
shared it with me.
that.
So gonzo, if you hear a kid is into gonzo porn, these are the live. You can't
Wow.
discern whether or not it's none of it's play acting. It looks all real to me. That a girl's being gang raped, a girl's being taken, and
Yeah.
horrible things done. So it's called gonzo porn.
Well, and now, so that's an interesting term I hadn't heard before. Thanks for that. But also, um, uh, AI being used in the porn industry in a big way, and so and then young girls are victimized, by someone that creates I don't even know what they call like the avatar that looks like the young girl, and they use that to victimize through graphic pornography. And I mean, I can't even wrap my head around some of that stuff. But when you talk about oppositional defiance, you know what we used to have a saying: garbage in, garbage out. And that saying hasn't lost its effect. We are seeing children who have become saturated with violence, violent, video games, violent television, violent movies, violent porn, and it has an effect. I mean, it has an effect. And so you wrap that in the midst of this child who already has been victimized, as you say, perked upon, that anger starts to just begin to boil within that individual. And it's going to come out somewhere. It's going to come out, and it often comes in that defiant behavior, so that they defy parents, but they defy anyone in authority because they have lost any sense of respect for authority. And so you have all of those dynamics happening. Now, remember, if people watching, this is one red flag, indicators. So there, you want more than one to actually be able to say this child, probably is a victim of sexual abuse, and then they've been, down the trans wagon as well. But um, oppositional defiance in itself is a huge indicator. That and self-harm, I would think, are probably, and the binge eating and anorexia. Those
There you
might
go.
be the three top ones, I would think.
And for boys, if you have cruelty to animals,
Oh, yes, yes.
if you have
Oh,
that
yeah.
with girls, it's super, almost 100% guaranteed
Yes. Yeah.
something's going on. Brad, do we have any? I just want to do my due diligence. You know me. I'll just keep going. We gotta check in with our friends if anybody's watching.
Well, we have a few viewers tonight, of course. We always get more viewers after the show gets published, but that's okay as long as we're reaching people, obviously. We'd love to have more people on the show live with us every Sunday night, but it is summertime and people are out at the lake, like Dr. Ann, for example, and she still manages to come online with us, but she's obviously in a good zone to get the internet going. Some people are stuck between mountains and who knows where else. So I know that Mr. Alex tonight has been active in the chat zone, and he was talking a little bit about a couple of things. First off, do you know that autistic people are starting to fight back against the neurodiversity and trans movement taking over the autism community?
That's awesome to hear. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's something that needs to
Because
happen, right?
autism, and so one of it was, in prior research, it had looked very much like about 30% of these children and adolescents were on that had been diagnosed with autism, not even on the spectrum. They were diagnosed with autism. And now what they're suspecting is that nearly all of these children are on the spectrum.
Well, did you know
So
that?
This is horrendous.
Did you know that
I'm
a
glad
lot of
to see.
the autism spectrum people, whether it's their family members or even some of the kids, I'm sure themselves, they're starting now to demand that the DSM-5 be reverted back to the DSM-4. So there's a push, at least, for that as well. So I think they're saying the right things. John, does that sound about right?
I think that sounds about right. Because again, perps and their apologists will use anything to their advantage, and they exploit facts. Right? They're great at the big lie. I call it the big lie theory. You say something boldly enough, loudly enough, emphatically enough, it'll put normal people back on their heels, because normal people aren't comfortable with lying, but psychopaths are. And so you can say the most outlandish things, such as trans people are, and before you know it, people are thinking, oh, there must be a trans person. So they have used, as we've all talked about, they've used those that have genetically inherited issues, and said, oh, the trans people are confused, they're XXXY chromosomes. No, these things are very, very minor as far as true anomalies, but they have also said that about, they've exploited the issue of autism.
So Ari
Well,
Neiman is responsible for some of those changes to autism within the DSM-5 as well, he's saying. Is that correct?
I don't know the name.
Yeah, I have to apologize. Good for our viewer. I'm not an autism expert, but we'll take his word for it.
So that's Ari Neiman, N-E with the slash E-M-A-N. Just so you know, if Dr. Ann is doing any research there to see who Ari is.
Well, it shows you our viewers are up on this, and we all need to be, right? There's such an it's such a war, this whole thing, a battle for the souls of kids, the minds of kids. Let's continue here. Here's the next behavioral indicator. We had touched on this briefly before, but it's worth talking about, not just anxiety in general, but severe anxiety all the way to panic attacks. Okay, so that's really a sudden onset of high anxiety, panic attacks, or a sense of dread. I like this little graphic. There's the attribution to it. It'll just go clockwise. So 1 billion thoughts, none of them helpful, right? So we call that flights of ideas. So again, kids, especially teenagers, are going to have this, but if there's a lot of stuff under the surface, all the more they're going to have that. Forget how blinking works. This is cute. I haven't really read all this. Okay, face is flushed or pale, right? Oh, I'm sorry, but none of this is funny. So this is if a child is having, in fact, a panic attack. So there's eyes are wide open. Face is flushed or pale, 90% sure this is an actual heart attack. Why? You got tachycardia going on. Stomach feels like two weasels wrestling. That's a good description, right? So now you have the GI tract, the stomach. Knees are either locked or wobbly. Think about the surge of adrenaline for a panic attack. Feet frozen in place. Don't even ask what's going on back here. Oh, don't even ask. Okay, so if you affect the GI tract, there may be a lot of movement, so to speak. Hands are cold or sweaty or both. That's because all the blood is going to the necessary organs. So typically feet and hands will be very cold in someone that's having a panic attack. Invisible hippopotamus sitting on chest. So there you go. That's the issue of the sensation that you can't breathe, and all the feelings all at once, or all feelings all at once, and racing thoughts. And any thoughts about that's a pretty good description of a panic attack.
It is, and you certainly don't have to be a child to have a panic attack. Lots of adults who have buried the sexual abuse from their childhood, it can surface right in the body, right? The body remembers. That's a really good book on sexual abuse.
Right. Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Body Keeps the Score. Yep. That's right.
Yep. And I think we need to remember that this is debilitating. And it can happen anywhere in the center of a grocery store. That's right. you're in a clothing store, you're sitting at work, or children at school, and yeah, feeling like they're dying in that moment. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. What a horrific experience.
Yeah, for an
So
adult,
yeah,
let alone a child, let alone a
well,
teen.
exactly.
That's right. Okay, so again, if your teen or child is having panic attacks and you see some of these other indicators, you need to seek help for that young person. Something is going on. Okay, another number 7. I added this one. This is not often touched on, but it's super important. It kind of fits a little bit with what we just talked about. Sudden onset of physical illnesses. These are really high indicators of the possibility of sexual abuse, and you can probably imagine why. Bladder infections, UTIs, upper urinary tract infections, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, interstitial cystitis. Interstitial cystitis. Not a lot of people have heard about that, but that is cysts. So that's why I wrote that out here. An inflamed or irritated bladder wall. And it can lead to scarring and stiffening of the bladder. The bladder can't hold as much urine as it did in the past, and it's a chronic disorder, extremely painful. A lot of my sexual abuse clients, or quite a few of them, have ended up with interstitial cystitis. And then think about this, anal fissures. Why would a young person suddenly have anal fissures? Hello, something is being inserted in there. So these are things that if you have a young person, you may want to, and if you're a therapist, you need to ask about these things. Parents, if you have a child that has a lot of these sex organ related issues, you need, now, does it mean that any one of these things, like UTI, not necessarily, or a bladder infection? Okay, we're not going to say that you suddenly that's a red flag, but repeated and severe.
Yes.
And then IBS, that's a chronic condition, right? So if you have enough anxiety going on, you can have irritable bowel syndrome. And then those other two, but anal fissures, that's a massive red flag. And your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'm just looking at those and thinking the same thing. Like in each one on their own is innocuous, right? It is something, it's a physical condition. But when you start adding some of these to some of the other indicators you've been talking about, then parents, it's like connecting the dots, putting the pieces of a puzzle together, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait a minute, my child has this happening and this happening. And that's what we want to do, is kind of open their eyes to see that these are all connected. So yeah, these are the sexual indicators. Now I'm thinking too of other physical issues. You know, even when you look at these, think about also migraine headaches and gastrointestinal issues, because those as well can be complicated in this whole mess, because it's how an individual their body is responding sometimes to the abuse. It comes out in all kinds of diverse ways.
That's right. One thing I've seen that is not uncommon in adults that have been sexually abused as kids. So you can imagine how many years then the trauma has been absorbed by the body, is lupus. So
That's
when
right.
when you start to see more of these clustering of symptoms together, it's worth exploring. And additional thoughts with
Yeah,
that?
and the other thing too, I would say with girls, menstrual issues. Like there's some significance in delayed, I would say, delayed puberty. Sometimes the body has reacted, but ongoing issues in that realm as well. So there's just so many things for parents to kind of start to just question, and be able to talk to the child. You know, you want to have a trust relationship built with your child
That
so
sounds
that
like a
they
really
can,
tough talk, Dr. Ann. I'm a dad and I'm a parent, so
I
I sit
know.
back and I go, wow, I don't think I could have that conversation with my daughter, for example. I don't know how to start that conversation off. What's your recommendation with that?
Well, and here's what I would say, Brad. I mean, you're not going to start at that point, but I mean, if you have noticed a whole lot of other behavioral issues happening, and just be able just to sit down and say, I'm just really concerned about, some physical things that seem to be happening. Perhaps you've noticed that there's cuts on the arm, those, what would
Telltale
ever,
signs, right?
yeah, the telltale signs. So say, what is it that makes you want to do that? And then the anxiety, because it's all coupled together, saying, it seems like you're really a whole lot more anxious these days, and I'm worried about you. Make sure that the child understands that this is out of concern for their well-being. You're not trying to probe into, delicate areas for uh, your own self. This is about them, and that you want to make sure they're okay. And so to be able to develop trust, spend time, you have to spend a lot of time with your child in this whole area. And when I'm talking about trust and that parental attachment and being a safe place for that child to fall. They're maybe not going to tell you right away, but you don't have to, intend every conversation. Well, I want to get to this point. You just love the child for who they are. And at some point, um, because you build that deep level of trust with the child, they're going to talk. They're going to start talking. And if not even to you, they'll start talking to someone. And, we can't let our egos get in the way here. We just want them to start talking to someone um, that they can share those deep things. And hopefully it won't be with their peers, because
Right.
peers can't always be very helpful. But then then proceed to get them the help they need. They may need professional help. When you find out your child's been sexually abused, most parents aren't prepared to deal with that. I mean, what parent can do that? You're in shock themselves.
Yeah.
So, understanding that and being able then to reach out for help.
Mental health
And
is
I
a
brought
big part
this
of all
graphic.
this, right?
Say it again,
I'm
Brett.
sorry.
Mental health is a very big part of all of this.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why it's so insidious for people to look at all these red flag indicators and reframe them as gender related, and meaning they would ignore then these. Okay, but a comprehensive psychosocial assessment will include physical health. The reason I went back to this is, and Brad, it was an excellent point on your part. As a parent, you will know about these because these will require some sort of antibiotics, some sort of medical intervention. So if you start to see your child has continuous these, that raises some questions. But inevitably, if a child has that going on and it's the result of sexual abuse, they will have all of those going on. So
Some
that's why, again, it's just being able to connect the dots, put the pieces together, as Anne said. So again, parents are all good people that have any involvement with kids. We want to be able to kind of connect these dots and not see these in isolation.
single parents have obviously an opportunity to not only try to communicate with their child who's going through a lot at that moment, being not having mom or dad around, and being with a single parent. Grandparents can now reach out, help out in this process as well, I assume, Dr. Ann.
Grandparents are so significant in the lives of young people. And I think one of the things we've really lost in the last few generations is that generational connectedness, so that a child actually grows up around their grandparents and has that relationship. Grandparents at this point to, being able to talk about things. So let me throw this line out to you. A child has the right to refuse. You know, we want to talk to children in the sense that, if somebody, you know, asks you to get into their car. Remember how we used to talk about that? Don't go ride with strangers. Don't do this. Don't do that. Well, we didn't always do a good job of talking about the people that they know, and that would offend the child. And so we need to teach boundaries again. We need to go back and teach all of those things. But grandparents and parents can do a lot of that.
Kids can be put into precarious positions very, very quickly. And with kids of their own age that are just maybe a little bit more matured or have somebody else grooming them alongside, and that leads to trying to drag them in. And usually it's the groomer trying to get the child to drag somebody else along with them so that it becomes, well, I guess more of a happy family, but there's no happiness at the end of the day there. It's all harm, it's all hurt, it's all deviant, and it's all bad. So get involved with your kids.
That's right. And the other thing I would say there, Brad, is that what we're seeing now is exactly what you're saying, children on children sexuality, which is a never before thing that we've experienced in the culture. It's rapidly growing that children are actually starting to sexually offend each other. It's horrific when you think of that. But that goes back very much to what Jon was saying about violent video games, if there's no boundaries, right? There's no boundaries, and those children then grow up and they don't have self-respect, they don't have boundaries for themselves, and they do not respect other people's boundaries. Those boundaries are meant to be, safeguards, and what you find then is they are being ramrodded through.
Lay internet boundaries. That's number one. Lay internet boundaries, because it starts and it ends with pornography. Coming out of Montreal, Canada, known as Pornhub, Porn Geek, blah, blah, blah. There's just so much that's going on in our country that the laws don't want to throw this stuff back some other country. They seem to like it here for some reason. And I think as soon as we get rid of Justin Trudeau, we'll have a better chance of, I guess, taking back our country and doing the right thing for our children going forward and our grandchildren.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, can I just mention this too? When you were talking about parents and you were looking at all of the indicators, if you strongly suspect that your child has been sexually abused, and you confront them and say, I'm wondering if something's happened to you, children most likely will deny it, like off the bat, because they're scared. So you need to, as a parent, stay calm, because there's other times the child, when you have a good relationship with that child, the child would come directly to you. That's what we want to see happen. And that you would be calm and listen to them. Don't try to, listen to acknowledge what they're telling you. Don't try to divert the conversation. It's something more comfortable. You want to validate whatever feelings they're having about what's happened, and usually it's a lot of emotional pain, and you need to report it. Remember, we're talking to children, and Jon's talked several times about mandated reporting, but parents have, a responsibility to protect their children and need to be on the phone and say, look, I think something's happened to my child. And then seek professional help, because we aren't really equipped to deal with this stuff. This is not supposed to happen to our kids, right?
This is happening in schools. That's the problem, in schools, and these people are pushing it in these schools. I want to phone the police right now and tell them, look, I believe that there's grooming going on within the education system, but they're not going to listen to me because our courts aren't going to back it up either. So we're going to have to get there at some point down the road. But for our listeners and our viewers, it's in your hands. You're the boss now. You have to get involved. You're supposed to be the responsible, mature adult. Try to act like one, please.
Yeah. Anne and Brad, as you both were talking, all of a sudden my mind went to, perpetrators are very sophisticated. And when they get busted, or they will still possibly try to give they're going to try to craft themselves as victims. So one indicator of someone who is a sophisticated manipulator is someone that will actually say they were abused, especially once they're busted or when it comes out. So the question is, if you have somebody as an adult who, as a young person, as a minor, never had any of these, right? Self-injurious behaviors, behavioral indicators. So, how were their grades in school? How was their adjustment? Did they ever have physical, academic, emotional, social issues? Did they ever get into drugs? Did they ever have outward defiance? Did they have panic attacks and panic disorder? Did they have all these indicators? If someone didn't have any indication of these sort of things, the likelihood of them being perped on is almost zero. So when it comes to, if anybody's asked the question, well, wait a minute, can't somebody fake these things? Well, they'll probably do it as an adult or a young adult, and then for leverage, they're going to have secondary gains. And the question is, okay, let's take the overall composite picture. Is there any indication? Trust me, if a kid was violated in one way or another, there's going to be behavioral indicators. Here's another one. We looked at this before, wanted to add it in again. A child that is highly or overly sexualized. There's a question about that because perps are looking for that. Somebody who acts younger, older than their age. Once they become an adult, there may be indications perps want women to look younger and kids to look older. So that's why you need to be very careful if an adult, especially a male, is into child beauty pageants.
Oh my goodness, there we go. That's a
There we go.
whole other issue, making these children, young children, and I'm thinking 4 and 5-year-olds with lots of makeup in these skimpy clothing, really scant clothing, and the parents
That's
are
right.
providing all of this. Remember, like they're promoting it, and it's like, oh, who's watching these kids? It's one thing for them to do some dance routines and stuff like that, but they're so vulnerable. They're so vulnerable. We have to be so careful with all of these things.
There we go.
And
So,
I was thinking about early sexualization of children. Oh, you were going to say something, John.
no, keep going.
Um, you know, one of the things that manifests in a child, and I'm thinking prepubescent child, is that they start behaving sexually in their mannerisms, and it's so unnatural for a child that between 4 and 8 or 9, 10 years old. That used to be so abnormal, and it was a quick indicator that, wait a minute, something's gone on with this child. Now they're being encouraged to all kinds of sexual practices, even in the classroom, that everything is okay, you can do this. And so it's pretty hard to differentiate what part of this has happened because they've been sexually abused at home by a friend, whatever, and because they've been in the classroom and heard all these things. So
Right.
it's very hard.
If you have any man that's going to teach a child how to twerk, you're dealing with a
Exactly.
very sexually deviant man that is saturated in pornography. He is grooming your child. But if he dresses in drag, the door will be held wide open to him to come into a classroom. Okay, the next indicator. So again, a sexually advanced child, so to speak. That's an indicator. And Brad, you had mentioned about social media. So I thought I would add this one. A significant increase in screen time and online activities. The child now is withdrawing to his or her room. They're on their phones. And this is what's so difficult in this day and age, right? Because parents need a break. They're tired, so they give phones to their kids. But before you know it, you don't know what's going on. But above and beyond that, if you have a child that seems to be lost in their phone or screen, whatever electronics, you don't know who they're interacting with. So I wrote down here, predators and cult leaders, manipulators, sociopaths, and psychopaths hunt for vulnerable young people to exploit. Emotionally wounded kids. So here's kind of a general smattering of kinds of kids they're going to target. And we all tend to think the emotionally wounded child, so those that have been through aversive childhood experiences, we discussed that last time, ACEs, those are 10 indicators that things are going on in the home. They'll also look at, they'll target awkward kids, meaning online, they can sense them, they can very quickly, perps are adept at finding out, am I dealing with an emotionally wounded child? They're going to angle, they'll find that angle to come at that child. An awkward kid with autism, we just talked about that, because they're socially awkward, therefore they tend to feel isolated and they lack their intuition. There we go, isolated and latchkey kids. So kids that are bored or kids that are lonely. And this is an interesting one, wanted to throw it out. Self-entitled kids. Kind of interesting. This doesn't fit the norm, but I still want to throw it out anyways because they can be used by predators. And these will be the ones that will tend to really protect the perpetrators and the ones that will turn quickly on their parents. So self-entitled kids, we may do a series entitled When Good Kids Go Bad. It's not often, but it does happen. If anybody's familiar with the 3,000-year-old book of Psalms, many of those were written by King David. David had a number of sons, one of whom was Absalom, and he was never abused, but he ended up becoming angry at his dad for something his dad did not abuse, but the way his dad didn't take care of issues within the family. And so he allowed that to boil to a point he wanted to kill his father. He wanted to usurp the throne, and he did so for a moment of time. So different category, but still these perps will look for those kind of kids. That's not an indication of sexual abuse, but I wanted to throw that out because there's a lot of parents whose kids have been sucked into the trans movement that the kids weren't abused. The parents were caught off guard because somehow these perps and perp apologists were able to find a chink in their armor, find a crack, and start to feed that self-entitlement. And any thoughts about any of those?
Yeah, well, and I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes, but one of the things that I'm thinking about, looking at these pictures, John, and I'm just, this is what really hurts my heart, is because, number one, we really need parents to parent their children. And a child laying in bed with a cell phone is not a good example of good parenting, because we need to set very, very wise boundaries with cell phones and social media. And I mean, many might think I'm archaic, but cell phones introduced to children beneath the age of below the age of 14, I think is asking for trouble.
Hey, you're not asking or advocating for parental censorship. You're just asking to be careful with your kids. It's your responsibility. It's not even your rights. It's your responsibility.
Right. If somebody has locks on their front door, should we call that censorship? As a matter of fact, again, we looked at some of these in the past. Here are some influences that are waiting for your kids. A lot of darker stuff out there. It's the pentagram going on. There's this mergence and convergence of dark spirituality and loose sexuality. Who do you think benefits from that? I mentioned that Target was selling that. That's an actual line, apparel line. There's a shirt. And what also will you see? They'll start to use other things. We looked at that about that in the past. There's plushies. You have plushies or deviant men pleasure themselves with those things, but furries and also drag queen story hour. Here's another kind of deviance. The perps and their apologists will call that art. That is not art. There can be a very quick assessment. You ask them this kind of thing. Are these sexual deviants? Are they likely are the men that are doing this likely accessing deviant porn on a regular basis? Are they grooming these kids, and should they be arrested? Matt Osborne and others would say, no, they'll dodge that. Anybody should be able to look at this and say, these are deviants. These guys are porn saturated. They are grooming their kids, and they should be arrested. But so that's a very straightforward question, right? You look at that and say, are these guys grooming guys that are naked? Are they grooming perps? Any adult should be aghast by that. So one way to discern who the nature of the person you're dealing with, the adult, if you don't see a degree of energy and disgust, then you're dealing with somebody who behind the scenes is probably almost likely, first of all, they need to have their electronics checked, but you're dealing with, if someone doesn't have disgust over men that are sexually deviant, then they're into it themselves. It's just
Well,
100% guaranteed.
Well, this is why parents have to be vigilant. And like Brad said, this isn't about censoring your children. This is about protecting your children. And your children have a right to be protected. You have the responsibility as well to protect your children. And that means saying no to cell phones, and no to computers in bedrooms. A computer in a central room.
Being on specific
Everyone
apps.
has laptops. Everyone has all these things now, but it's not helping our children. It's going to create more and greater chaos in their lives. So we have to be the responsible ones at some point and say, no, this is not happening. This is not good for you. And so, yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it tonight, you guys. There you go. I'll drop it on you.
There we go. Well, Ann, thank you for stopping by. You had a hard stop, but we'll end it right here, Brad, because we'll pick up we'll look at the clinical indicators. So we looked at behavioral indicators, and part 4 is coming up.
Well, thank you to both of you for being here tonight. Part 4 is going to be, I guess, a final maybe wrap up and conclusion, or are we going to need a 5th part too, John?
We probably going to need a 5th, but we
Yeah.
want to be comprehensive for parents and all good people. So
There's a lot
we'll
to
be methodical about it.
There's a lot to take in. If you're just getting here tonight for this part 3, well, we've got 2 other episodes that you want to go back and check in the days ahead, and you can make it back for next Sunday night. We'll be right back here, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement. Thank you, Dr. Ann Gillies. Thank you, Jon Uhler. I'm Brad Wilder. Till next time, everybody, remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight. We'll see you soon.